At the heart of this tragic story were three people: John Reynolds, a former Marine, and devoted husband Emily Reynolds, his loving but often lonely wife, and Father Mark, a charming and mysterious priest. Their once normal lives became tangled in lies and tragedy, haunting the peaceful town of Meadowbrook forever. John and Emily Reynolds looked like the perfect couple, married for over 10 years. They had built a life full of stability and respect. John, a decorated ex-Marine, was admired for his discipline and honesty. Emily, a stay-at-home mom, was loved for her kindness and active role in community activities. Their seemingly happy marriage was a cornerstone of their social circle, yet beneath this idyllic surface, Emily was often lonely. John's new job kept him away from home for long hours as a security consultant for a high-profile firm. John traveled frequently, leaving Emily alone to manage the household and their two children. His work, while prestigious, demanded nearly all of his time and energy. Emily's days were filled with longing. Her evening empty without John's presence as she busied herself with community and church activities, but the void in her heart grew with each passing day. Father Mark, the new priest at St. Mary's Church, was a magnetic figure. His sermons were impassioned, drawing more parishioners each Sunday. He seemed to understand the struggles and secrets of those who confided in him, offering solace and guidance. Emily found herself increasingly drawn to his charismatic presences. Seeking comfort in his words and company, she volunteered more at the church, hoping to fill the emptiness left by John's absence. As John's absences grew longer, Emily's bond with Father Mark deepened. She found in him a confidant, someone who listened without judgment. Their conversations grew more personal, more intense. Father Mark, behind his benevolent facade, harbored his own secrets and ambition. She saw Emily's vulnerability and seized the opportunity to draw her closer. The scandal began with whispers, as all scandals do. Meadowbrook was a small town and secrets were hard to keep. John, oblivious to the growing closeness between his wife and the priest, focused on his demanding job. He was proud of his work, providing security strategies for influential clients, ensuring their safety in a world full of unseen threats, yet remained unaware of the greatest threat brewing in his own home. Father Mark arrived in Meadowbrook as the new parish priest, quickly becoming a beloved figure. His sermons were passionate, his counsel wise, and his presence comforting. He had a unique ability to connect with his parishioners, offering guidance and solace in times of need. Emily, deeply spiritual and actively involved in the church, found herself drawn to Father Mark's charisma and warmth. The affair between Emily and Father Mark began innocuously. Emily, struggling with feelings of loneliness due to John's frequent absences for work and community services, sought solace in the church. Father Mark, always approachable, became her confidant. Their conversations, initially centered around faith and personal struggles, gradually grew more personal. Emily felt a connection with the priest that she had never felt with anyone else, a sense of being truly understood and valued. Father Mark was completely captivated by Emily's honesty and vulnerability. He found himself drawn to her not just as a parishioner, but as a woman. Their meetings became more frequent and more private, held in the quiet, hidden corners of the church. The lines between their roles began to blur, and unspoken tensions emerged between them. The forbidden nature of a priest falling for a married woman added a thrilling danger to every stolen glance and quiet conversation. As their relationship grew, they began to meet outside the church, pretending it was for spiritual guidance. Emily and Father Mark would take long walks in the countryside, their conversations filled with laughter and shared secrets. Their emotional connection quickly turned physical, their hands brushing against each other, lingering touch, sparking intense desire. They found themselves in a passionate affair, their bodies pressed together in the shadows, hearts racing with the thrill of forbidden love. Each secret meeting was charged with the excitement of what they were doing, crossing sacred lines and giving into the powerful pull between them. The weight of their secret was heavy, the knowledge of their affair a constant reminder of the boundaries they were breaking. Every touch, every whisper, every momental one was filled with the taboo of their relationship, making their forbidden love even more intoxicating. The Affair between Emily and Father Mark grew increasingly intense, consuming their thoughts and actions. They became reckless, meeting in riskier locations and leaving behind subtle clues that hinted at their end. Emily's behavior began to change noticeably. She became more distant and evasive, with John Heron's steady demeanor now marked by restlessness and distraction. Father Mark Towers affected his sermons still more fervent and reflecting the turmoil within him. He struggled with his vows and the guilt of his actions, yet was unable to sever his connection with Emily. The affair provided a sense of excitement and fulfillment that he had never experienced before. John, initially oblivious to the affair, started noticing the changes in Emily, her late nights at the church, the secretive phone calls, and her sudden coldness towards him all pointed to something amiss. His suspicions grew, and he began to piece together the evidence of Emily's betrayal. His world, once stable and predictable, began to unravel. The community, too, started whispering. Meadowbrook was a small town where everyone knew each other's business, and the subtle changes in Emily and Father Mark did not go unnoticed. Gossip spread like wildfire, and the scandalous nature of their relationship became the subject of hushed conversations and speculative glances as the affair continued. A darker true theme urged. Father Mark had a history of similar indiscretions. It came to light that Emily was not the only woman he had seduced under the guise of spiritual guidances. Several other women on Strawn's charm and charisma came forward with their own stories of secret meetings and illicit affairs. The revelation of Father Mark's multiple affairs cast a sinister light on his relationship with Emily. The priest, seen as a pillar of the community, was now viewed with suspicion and contempt. The growing danger and desperation in Father Mark's actions became apparent. She sought to maintain his secret at any cost. Father Mark was desperate to keep his secrets, so he did something terrible. David, a regular churchgoer, caught Father Mark and Emily kissing in the confessional booth. David threatened to tell everyone unless Father Mark confessed, terrified of ruining his perfect image. Father Mark came up with a dark plan. He tricked David into going to the church's bell tower to talk. It was a dark, quiet night, just right for what Father Mark had in mind. The tower was high and out of the way as they stood by the edge. David grew more insistent, this voice rising with emotion. David didn't see Father Mark nudging him closer to the edge. In one swift, brutal motion, Father Mark pushed him. David's eyes popped wide open. Asha lost balance, his arms flailing for something to grab. But here was nothing. He screamed as she fell, the sound cutting through the quiet night. It seemed like forever. Before he hit the ground, the horrible thud of David's body echoed in the night. Blood spread around him, his body bent in weird ways. Father Mark looked down from the tower, his heart racing, seeing David dash, horrifying, but also a relief. His secret was safe. He quickly went down the tower and made sure noons all what happened. Confident he was alone, he dragged David's body to a hidden spot in the church's basement. He hid the body under old church stuff. Nobody used. His hands shook, but had tried to act normal, pretending nothing happened. Father Mark kept doing masses. Calm and collected. People noticed David was missing, but without a body it stayed a mystery. Father Mark comforted his people, acting concerned while he hid his guilt. Time passed, and people stopped asking about David. Father Mark kept up his act, giving hope and advice to everyone. But inside he was always nervous, scared of every unexpected sound or shadow. He knew the big risk he took, but felt they had no choice. Emily, unaware of the deadly length Father Mark had gone to continued their affairs. He noticed a change in him, a darkness that seemed to hang over him, but had dismissed her concerns with a smile, had tried to convince himself that he could move on, that he could bury his guilt along with David. But the weight of his actions bore down on him each day, a struggle to maintain his full. The police investigation eventually grew cold. There were no leads, no suspects, nothing to tie Father Mark to the crime. He began to believe he had gotten away with it. There zoomed his life, but the memory of that night never left him. It haunted his dreams and tainted his every waking moment. The thought that had silenced David, but the torment of his conscience was relentless. It was then that the moment Johan had dreaded finally unfolded before his eyes. His life had been built on a foundation of love, trust, and shared dreams with his wife Emily. However, recent times had seen a shadow casting over their relationship. As Emily became distant of 10, lost in her thoughts and frequently away from home, overcome with suspicion, John resolved to uncover the truth by following Emily one overcast afternoon. His pursuit led him to Mary's church, where he saw her entering the sanctuary quietly. He slipped inside and hid behind the altar, his heart pounding with anticipation from his concealed vantage point. John observed Emily and Father Mark. She seemed different, lively, her face radiating a happiness that John hadn't seen in many months. Father Mark, known for his charismatic and caring nature, stood closer to her than seemed appropriate, touching her arm in a way that ignited a fiery anger in. This sight confirmed his gravest fears. An affair between his wife and the priest they both trusted engulfed by a mix of fury and heartbreak. John could hold back a burst from his hiding spot behind the altar, startling both Emily and Father Mark. Emily's face turned pale, while Father Marcus, usually so composed, appeared briefly unsettled. The confrontation that followed was fierce and charged with emotion. John's voice, heavy with betrayal, echoed through the church as she used the meech word, heavy with the pain of betray. "How could you do this to me?" he yelled, voice breaking with every word. "To us, to our family." Emily, completely taken aback and struggling for words, stammered, ears beginning to form in her eyes. "John, it's not what you think," she tried to explain, but guilt weighed her words down. Father Mark intervened, trying to calm the escalating situation with his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please, John, please listen. This wasn't supposed to happen. It's more complicated than you think," he pleaded, his voice desperate for John to understand and forgive. But John was consumed by rage, fueled by the betrayal from the two people he had held dearest. "Complicated? You've betrayed me, betrayed everything least." And for John shouted, his voice is seething with anger, his fists clenched, his body shaking with uncontrollable fury. The air was thick with tension, and the situation spiraled into chaos. John, consumed by uncontrollable rage, lunged at Father Mark. The priest, usually peaceful, was forced into a desperate act of self-defense to protect both himself and the dark secret they shared. His frantic eyes scanned the area and found a large, heavy crucifix near the altar. In a moment of sheer instinct, Father Mark grabbed the crucifix. The first swing struck John with a sickening thud, splitting his forehead open and descending blood spraying. John, driven by fury, charged again. But Father Mark, gripped by terror, swung the crucifix with all his might. Each blow was more brutal than the last, bones cracking and flesh tearing. Blood splattered the altar as Father Mark struck again and again, the sound of the blows echoing in the church. The final crushing hits shattered John's skull, leaving him lifeless in a pool of blood. The sacred crucifix, stricken with Father Mark's hands, shook, covered in John's blood and bits of flesh. The floor was slick with crimson. John's body, a broken, bloody mess, his face was almost unrecognizable. Caved in from the force of the blows, the priest stood over the lifeless body, panting, surrounded by the gruesome aftermath of his desperate fight for survival. The aftermath was harrowing. Emily, witnessing the shocking spiral into violence, stood frozen, overcome with horror and sorrow, her life once brimming with love and future hopes lay in ruins. She collapsed beside John's body, her cries filling the haunting silence that followed the tragic encounter. Father Mark, staring down at his blood-stained hands and the body of his former friend, felt the full weight of his actions. Panic overwhelmed him, and he fled, leaving behind a scene of chaos and tragedy. His escape was not just from the physical location, but from the crushing guilt and the looming consequences of his actions. The quiet night was shattered by the flashing red and blue lights of police cars racing through the town's narrow streets. Emily Reynolds, distraught and in shock, had called 911, her voice trembling as she reported the horrific scene. Father Mark, covered in John's blood, fled the scene of his crime, his heart pounding with fear and guilt. The small town, once his sanctuary, now felt like a maze of danger and betrayal as the first light of dawn touched Meadowbrew. The news of John's murder spread fast, so the police started to search every corridor of the church. And what they found shocked them. In a dark corner of the church, police found David's body, horribly twisted from a bad fall. Now they knew there were two fatal victims whose destinies were sealed at the hands of the same man. This gruesome discovery left no doubt. Father Markin's suspected figure was now seen as a monster. The police scoured every part of the church, for clues each hidden spot revealing more about the dark secrets it held, and so the manhunt began. Alunitz. We have a suspect on the run, Father Marcus considered armed. And dangerous approach with caution came the urgent message over the police radio. Father Mark moved through the back alleys and hidden paths of the town, his mind racing for a plan. He knew the police would be closing in soon. His only chance was to reach thence woods at the edge of town, where he could lose himself and hopefully evade capture Detective Miller. A seasoned officer with a reputation for her relentless pursuit of justice, coordinated the manhunt. She knew every corner of Meadowbrook and used her knowledge to predict Father Mark's movements. Roadblocks were set up at all major exits, and officers combed the streets and surrounding areas. Father Mark's heart pounded as she reached the outskirts of the town. The dense forest loomed ahead, offering a glimmer of hope. He glanced back, seeing the distant flicker of police lights and hearing the faint wail of sirens. With a final burst of energy, he plunged into the woods, his mind a whirlwind of fear and desperation. The forest was thick and confusing, the underbrush tugging at his clothes and slowing his progress. He stumbled over roots and rocks, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made him jump, fearing the approach of the police. The reality of his actions began to weigh heavily on him, his thoughts a chaotic mix of guilt and self-preservation. Detective Miller was not far behind, shielding of officers into the forest, their flashlights cutting through the early morning fog. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, mingling with the tension of the chase. The forest, usually a place of peace, now felt like a trap, closing in on Father Mark's. Predout, he can't have gone far, Miller ordered. Their voices steady and determined. She knew they were close. The broken branches and disturbed foliage provided a clear trail. The dogs, strained for tracking, barked and pulled at their leashes, eager to catch their quarry. Father Mark's strength waned as she pushed deeper into the forest. His mind raced with thoughts of escape, regret, and the terrible crime he had committed. He couldn't help but think of Emily, the woman who had unknowingly set these tragic events in motion. The weight of his sins felt unbearable, and he began to consider a final desperate act to escape. Just Ticey. Suddenly, the barking of police dogs pierced the air. Panic surged through Father Marcus. He realized his time was running out. He broke into a desperate sprint, but exhaustion and fear clouded his judgment. He stumbled to a clearing where he was met with the blinding beams of police flashlights. Freeze, put your hands where we can see them. Detective Miller's voice rang out, firm and authoritative. Father Mark, panting and defeated, raised his blood-stained hand. She fell to his knees, the weight of his actions crushing him. The officers quickly surrounded him, securing him in handcuffs. As they led him away, he felt the cold metal bite into his wrists, a physical manifestation of his guilt. In a moment of sheer despair, Father Mark made a desperate attempt to take his own life. As the officers were distracted, he lunged towards a jagged rock, trying to end his torment. However, the officers were quick to react, pulling him back and restraining him more tightly. His failed suicide attempt only added to his misery. As the sun fully rose over Meadowbrook, the once serene town now stood witness to the dramatic capture of its fallen priest. Father Mark was led away, his fate sealed by his own dark deeds. The manhunt that ended, but a scars left in the community, would linger for years to come. Father Mark was taken into custody, his mind a blur of regret and despair. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. As she sat in his cell, the reality of his situations, and there on bars and concrete walls, were a constant reminder of his sins and the life he had destroyed in prison. Father Mark faced the torment of his conscience. Daily his attempts to seek redemption were met with the cold reality of his actions. The whispers of the other, Rinmetest, the isolation and the knowledge of the pain he had caused weighed heavily on him. He had tried to escape justice, but now he would spend the rest of his life facing it. The community of Meadowbrook slowly began to heal. But the memory of Father Mark's betrayal and the tragic events that followed remained etched in their minds. The church, once a place of solace, now stood as a reminder of the darkness that had briefly consumed their town. And so Father Mark served his life sentence, haunted by the ghosts of his past, this failed escape attempt, a constant remind. Dear of his inescapable guilt, could John have ever imagined the depths of betrayal that awaited him? Was Emily's search for solace destined to end in tragedy? And what of Father Mark, whose dark secrets and desperate actions tore a community apart? How will Meadowbrook heal from such profound devastation? Thank you for joining us in uncovering this harrowing tale. Click here for another true crime story.